Welcome back to our channel. Today we will explore a new case, the case of Elisa Matthewson. This story takes place in a small town called Valrico, Florida, with a population of about 5,000 people. Elisa was a devoted wife and a caring mother. She had been married to Trevor Summers for over 15 years, but eventually decided to file for divorce. The reason for this is Trevor's relentless need to control every aspect of Elisa's life and their children's lives. When Elisa informed Trevor of her decision to divorce, he vehemently opposed it. He began using their children as tools to manipulate her, hoping she would reconsider. Elisa and Trevor first met in 1995 while attending high school in a Philadelphia suburb. They started dating 3 years later and quickly formed a strong bond. Both were outgoing, charismatic, and serious about their future together. But they felt unprepared to settle down due to their lack of career achievements. They decided to prioritize building their careers before starting a family. In 2001, after years of dating, Elisa and Trevor got married, marking an important milestone in their lives. Their friends and family fully supported their decision. At this time, their relationship had stood the test of time. For Elisa, marriage was the realization of a long-held dream of creating a family. Soon after, they welcomed their first child, a daughter named Arden. Over the years, they had 4 more children: Landon, Bryn, Grady, and Cooper. Elisa found joy in growing their family, believing that each child added more love to their lives. However, Trevor had different priorities and chose to focus on advancing his career. Trevor initially a landscaping business, but soon moved on to launching a pool building and maintenance company. After that, he ventured into real estate and pursued various other business ideas. He was passionate about being an entrepreneur, and Elisa supported him in all his efforts. However, Trevor often started businesses quickly, and most of them failed before making any significant profits. He struggled to find a clear direction, and most of his ventures didn't generate much income. Trevor's constant pursuit of new opportunities caused the family to move frequently. Over the years, they lived in Pennsylvania, Florida, Vegas, and California, finally settling permanently in Sunshine State. These relocations made homeschooling necessary for their children. Elisa took on the dual role of teacher and homemaker, while their eldest daughter, Arden, helped with chores. Despite her many responsibilities, Elisa managed everything with ease. The family often hosted guests and lively gatherings where Trevor would enthusiastically share his latest ideas. They lived in a beautiful house near the beach, creating the appearance of an ideal life. Over time, their relationship started to fall apart. Arden, the eldest daughter, recalled many happy moments. The family often spent time together at the beach, played video games, or enjoyed board games. While Arden was always close to her mother, she had an especially strong bond with her father and was often called a daddy's girl. Sadly, this close relationship later allowed Trevor to manipulate the situation. As Arden entered her teenage years, Elisa began to notice how Trevor exerted more control over her and the children. With each new child, his dominance grew, affecting every part of their daily lives. Elisa was eventually restricted to wearing only clothes Trevor approved of, socializing only with people he allowed, and having her social media activity closely monitored. He prohibited her from speaking to men online and displayed extreme jealousy. Trevor's possessiveness escalated to the point where he forbade Elisa from standing or sitting near any male strangers at church. He would become upset even if she simply walked past or greeted someone she knew. Some people, including Elisa, believed that Trevor's extreme behavior was tied to the family's financial troubles. By that time, Elisa had witnessed several business dealings that revealed Trevor was deeply in debt, often failing to pay others or collect money owed to him. He was even arrested multiple times on suspicion of financial fraud. Each time, Trevor shifted the blame onto others or external factors. It became increasingly clear that he was not suited for the business world, despite his repeated failures. Trevor stubbornly defended his business ventures and refused to let Elisa have any input. At the same time, he tightened his control over their home life, becoming harsher and creating an even more oppressive domestic environment. By 2016, Elisa had grown weary of her life and decided to ask for a divorce. However, this was not part of Trevor's plans. He pleaded with her to stay for the sake of their children and promised to change. Still in love with him, Elisa decided to give him another chance. Unfortunately, instead of improving, Trevor became even more controlling. He confiscated her phone and car and forbade her from leaving the house, effectively trapping her as if she were a prisoner. It became clear that this was outright domestic abuse and highly dangerous. Elisa began contemplating ways to escape, unaware that Trevor was also making his own plans concerning her. By October 2016, Trevor's control over Elisa had reached an extreme level. For weeks, he had not allowed her to leave the house even once. He monitored her every move around the clock, never letting her out of his sight. This behavior alarmed Elisa, as she sensed that something terrible was about to happen. She feared what Trevor might be planning and anxiously waited for an opportunity to break free. One day, Trevor left the house to run errands, but locked his family inside, taking advantage of the rare opportunity when he was absent. Elisa secretly used her phone to contact an organization that supports victims of domestic violence. She explained that this was her first chance in weeks to act without Trevor's control. The organization warned her that her situation was urgent and extremely dangerous. That evening, when Trevor returned, he lashed out at Elisa, accusing her of ridiculous acts of infidelity and subjecting her to further emotional and physical abuse. Thankfully, the authorities had already been notified, and their timely arrival at the house pressured Trevor into letting Elisa and the children leave. Reluctantly, he agreed, though it was clear he had no intention of letting go quietly. Elisa soon faced housing challenges, forcing her and the children to seek refuge in a shelter for domestic violence survivors. The shelter provided them with protection from Trevor's control and allowed them to feel somewhat secure. Over time, the harassment stopped. Much to Elisa's relief, after several months in the shelter, she believed their ordeal was over and moved out with the children. With the support of social services, Elisa secured a place to live, a car, and a job, and she began the process of filing for divorce. Convinced that Trevor was out of her life for good, she felt optimism about the future. Encouraged by her newfound freedom, she even started exploring online dating and meeting new people. However, Elisa was wrong in her assumptions. After the divorce was finalized and custody arrangements were settled, she had to meet Trevor twice a week to exchange the children. These meetings were filled with noticeable tension, but no further aggressive outbursts occurred. By January 2017, Trevor seemed to have accepted the situation. A month later, he called Elisa, claiming there were some divorce-related documents she needed to sign. Trusting his recent calm demeanor, Elisa went to Trevor's house without any suspicion. At that time, Trevor's life was falling apart. He was facing possible imprisonment due to fraud allegations, and the image he had carefully crafted as a successful businessman and devoted family man also was crumbling. When Elisa arrived, Trevor tried to provoke her into a conversation, accusing her once again of infidelity and demanding a confession. In reality, there were no documents for her to sign. This was merely a ruse to draw her into a confrontation. When she attempted to leave, Trevor grabbed a machete, pressed it against her chest, and then held it to her throat. He kept her in this terrifying situation for several hours. Elisa eventually managed to calm him down and convinced him to let her go by promising not to call the police. Despite her promise, Elisa contacted emergency services as soon as she left. When the police arrived, Trevor denied everything, claiming she was lying and even threatened her life. Since there were no visible injuries on Elisa, the police believed his version of events. Following this incident, both Elisa and Trevor filed restraining orders against each other. Trevor began to take advantage of the situation to make the kids believe him, telling them that she was trying to send him to prison and take away his time with them. Trevor continued to build his narrative, blaming Elisa for the family's breakup. He told the children that he planned to reunite with them, and they eagerly believed him. The children were unaware of Elisa's living situation or the danger Trevor posed to her, as he had never directed his abuse at the children. This ignorance allowed Trevor to keep his growing children unaware of the true situation and the danger he represented to Elisa. Arden was manipulated by Trevor into becoming his informant. She spied on her mother and reported back to him. On March 11, 2017, Arden followed Trevor's instructions and informed Trevor when her mother went to bed with the younger children. She also left a window open for him. That night, Trevor arrived at Elisa's house with Landon, who stayed in the car, while leaving his 3-year-old son, Cooper, home alone, asleep in bed. He broke into the house, attacked Elisa, and took her phone to prevent her from contacting the authorities. He then dragged her into the living room, where the children ran out to check on their mother. Trevor ordered the children to return to their rooms and stay there until he allowed them to come out. Meanwhile, Arden remained in Trevor's car, watching over Landon. She believed that her parents were calmly talking and working out their problems, and that they would soon come out so they could all return to their dad's house and be a happy family again, just like before. But that outcome never came to pass. Around 4:00 May, Trevor sent his daughter a message saying the plan had changed. He instructed her to enter the house. When Arden came inside, Elisa saw her daughter and painfully realized that her daughter had sided with Trevor. Trevor then told Arden to take the other children to the car and drive them to his home. He assured her he would return later with Elisa in her car after resolving their reconciliation issues. The girl, Arden, trusted her father and agreed to help. While the inexperienced teenager desperately tried not to get into an accident on the road, Trevor tied his ex-wife to the bed. Over the next few hours, Trevor made wild claims about having millions of dollars in offshore accounts, preparing a yacht, and planning to escape into international waters. During this time, he repeatedly assaulted Elisa, using a weapon to intimidate her. He also forced her to take sedative medication, causing her to periodically fall asleep during the abuse and making it impossible for her to resist. At one point, Trevor used Elisa's phone to record a video in which he described his plan, in which he said, "I'm here with Elisa at her house, which I'm not allowed to be in. I woke Elisa up and held her against her will. Around 600 He tried to suffocate her by placing a pillow over her face and sitting on it, desperate to survive. Elisa agreed to whatever he demanded, including going with him to the yacht and fleeing into international waters. Trevor eventually decided to leave, taking Elisa with him. She did not resist because she understood that Trevor was not in control of himself in these moments and was extremely dangerous. It was clearly a matter of life and death. They got into the car and started driving. About an hour later, Trevor parked near a supermarket on the outskirts of town to buy some supplies. While he was getting out of the car, Elisa managed to jump out, screaming for help. She ran toward a young man working at the supermarket, who had just stepped outside to smoke a cigarette. Before she could reach him, another man, large, muscular, and leaving the store with his shopping bags, grabbed her. He twisted her arms behind her back and forced her back into the car. That man is Trevor, then got into the driver's seat and drove away. The supermarket employee, alarmed by what he had witnessed and suspecting a kidnapping, called 911. He provided authorities with the car's make, color, and license plate number. The car was quickly identified as that of Trevor Summers. A man had recently gone through a contentious divorce. Investigators quickly looked into Trevor and realized Elisa had previously filed several domestic violence complaints against him. This information painted a deeply troubling picture. Suspecting foul play, detectives decided to visit Elisa's home, where she lived with her children. However, when they arrived, the house was empty. The children were eventually found at Trevor's house, being cared for by Arden. When asked about their parents' whereabouts, none of the children could provide an answer. It became increasingly evident that Elisa had been kidnapped and was in grave danger. Understanding the sensitivity of the situation, the police opted to speak carefully with the children to avoid alarming them. Both parents' phones were turned off and untraceable, leaving the police with no immediate leads. Instead of scaring the children with suggestions that their mother may have been abducted by their father, officers gently questioned them to assess the situation. As the children described their parents' relationship, the police were shocked, especially considering the young ages of the witnesses. All the children recounted incidents of Trevor abusing Elisa, though the children themselves were never physically harmed. They recalled seeing their mother tied up by Trevor, with her hands and feet bound for hours. That evening, Arden unintentionally helped him with his plans. While on the phone with her father, Trevor convinced Arden that he wanted to reconcile with Elisa and repair their relationship. He instructed Arden to leave a window open after everyone in the house had gone to bed, claiming it was part of a plan to surprise Elisa. Trusting her father's intentions, the naive girl complied. This gave Trevor access to the house, and without realizing his true motives, Arden unknowingly became complicit in his scheme. During the night, while the rest of the family was asleep, Trevor entered the bedroom where his ex-wife Elisa was sleeping. Her 7-year-old daughter, Bryn, and 5-year-old son, Grady, were also in the room. Elisa woke up to something wet dripping on her face and, still disoriented, sensed a threatening presence. Standing over her was Trevor, pressing a damp cloth against her face, overcome with fear. Elisa screamed and struggled. At first, she couldn't identify who it was, but she soon realized it was Trevor. Frantically, she threw objects from her bedside table at him in an attempt to defend herself. However, Trevor grabbed her by the ankles, dragged her out of bed, and onto the floor. Her loud screams woke the children, who instinctively realized their father was attacking their mother. They cried and pleaded with him not to harm her. Trevor then dragged Elisa into another room, warning the children to stay out. What exactly happened to Elisa in that room remained a mystery to the children. Hours later, Arden took the children and drove them to their father's house. The police were continuing their search for Trevor. Based on the children's statements, detectives reconstructed the events and used the information to initiate a detailed search for Trevor, attempting to predict his escape routes. However, what the children didn't know was that Trevor had access to a yacht and millions of dollars, giving him a possible advantage in evading authorities. Before that, when leaving the supermarket, Trevor drove Elisa along rural roads near the Tampa Bay coastline, stopping occasionally in isolated areas, enraged by her escape attempt. He retaliated by slashing her wrists with a razor and yelling at her. Eventually, he took her to a small, abandoned town, where they stayed for more than a day. During this time, Elisa saw Trevor writing suicide notes addressed to his children and the police. He continued to assault her throughout the ordeal. Despite the horrors she endured, Elisa focused on thoughts of her children and remained determined to survive for their sake. On the morning of March 13th, Trevor and Elisa arrived in Little Harbor, a resort area where they had frequently vacationed as a family. Elisa immediately saw this as a bad omen because the location held significant meaning for Trevor, and she feared it might be where he planned to end both of their lives. Trevor parked the SUV behind a dumpster, moved to the back seat, and wrapped a rope around Elisa's neck. For several moments, he strangled her, and Elisa felt she was on the verge of death. Suddenly, Trevor let go of the rope and moved to the driver's seat. He sped off down a dirt road toward the beach. Unbeknownst to Trevor, police vehicles were closing in from behind. Then, when he realized he couldn't escape, he stopped the SUV, took out the razor he had previously used to threaten Elisa, and began slashing his own throat. Elisa screamed in terror, pleading with him to stop. The police surrounded the vehicle, forcing Trevor to drop the blade. They quickly helped Elisa escape from the horrific scene. Despite her injuries, Elisa survived. Both she and Trevor were taken to the nearest hospital for treatment. Trevor's injuries were not life-threatening. Elisa later gave a detailed account of the abuse she had endured at Trevor's hands. However, even then, Trevor denied any wrongdoing. He claimed Elisa had gone with him willingly, asked to be tied up, and consented to the violence as part of her interest in extreme intimacy. This blatant lie was dismissed by everyone. Trevor faced 11 charges, including attempted murder, kidnapping, assault, and endangering the lives of his children. He denied all accusations, which delayed the trial. Additional setbacks arose from bureaucratic issues. Thankfully, Trevor was denied bail and remained in custody, allowing Elisa and her children to feel safer. Trevor spent 5 years in detention before preliminary hearings began in 2022. Prosecutors argued that his actions were premeditated and that Elisa would have died if the police had not intervened in time. In contrast, his defense attorney claimed the events were a coincidence caused by the stress Trevor had been under due to his wife's behavior. The defense even argued that Elisa had asked to be kidnapped and treated roughly. However, the prosecution's case was strong, supported by overwhelming evidence that disproved Trevor's claims. This included a video Trevor had recorded himself, handwritten confessions, suicide notes, and testimony from a store employee Elisa had approached for help. Physical evidence, such as the pillow he used to smother her and the ropes used to restrain her. Consequently, the defense's version sounded completely unconvincing. Elisa testified in court against her ex-husband, Trevor, declaring she was no longer afraid of him and was determined to see him sentenced to life in prison for the 55 hours of torment he had inflicted on her. Despite this, the case was far from over, and much depended on the eloquence of Elisa, the prosecutor, and Trevor's attorney. During several hours of questioning, Elisa provided detailed accounts of the abuse she suffered before the kidnapping, including acts of torture, physical violence, and threats. Her testimony appeared to deeply resonate with the jury. Following her statements, Trevor underwent cross-examination. His testimony lasted over an hour, but as he spoke, the prosecution seemed increasingly confident in their case. It became evident that their position was stronger. Despite this, Trevor's defense attorney continued to search for weaknesses in the prosecution's arguments, aiming to minimize Trevor's culpability. Much of the defense's questioning focused on the abuse allegations. The attorney tried to convince the jury that everything had been consensual, thereby attempting to undermine the prosecution's case. They also tried to portray Elisa as manipulative and deceitful, claiming she had intentionally pushed Trevor to his breaking point, triggering his aggression and subsequent actions. Elisa and Trevor's children are 13-year-old Bryn and 19-year-old Arden, also participated in the hearings. Bryn had vivid and clear memories of the night her father assaulted her mother. The children's fear was unmistakable, and it became increasingly apparent that Trevor could no longer evade justice. When asked about the wound on his neck, Trevor claimed it was the result of emotional distress, stemming from a stressful situation. The defense attorney emphasized that Trevor had no prior criminal record or history of violence. Nonetheless, the incident with Elisa severely undermined his credibility. The hearings lasted 3 days. In closing arguments, the defense attorney contended that the alleged kidnapping was merely Trevor's misguided attempt to reconcile with his wife, which had spiraled out of control. Elisa, however, firmly asserted that she had narrowly escaped being murdered and described Trevor as extremely dangerous. In a last-ditch effort, the defense questioned whether Elisa had been attacked in her home, pointing to the absence of blood, broken furniture, or other signs of a struggle. The claim that she had been tied up in a car in a supermarket parking lot was also contested. However, these arguments resembled the desperate attempts of a defense team that had become entangled in its own inconsistent versions of events. The jury deliberated for over 5 hours before reaching a verdict. Ultimately, they found Trevor guilty on all charges. For Elisa, justice was finally served. Overcome with emotion, she broke down in tears and fell into the arms of Jeff Mathewson, whom she had met shortly before the 2017 attack. Jeff had been a constant source of support throughout her ordeal. Elisa believed her ex-husband's aggression might have been fueled by his jealousy of Jeff, while others speculated that Trevor's actions stemmed from his despair over losing control of his life. In 2021, Elisa married Jeff, describing him as the person who made her feel truly safe for the first time. In later interviews, she spoke openly about the devastating impact Trevor had on her life and family, as well as the extreme and dangerous measures he had taken. Trevor's manipulative behavior, particularly involving their children, left lasting scars. Arden, one of their children, struggled to relearn how to trust others, a process made even harder by the cruelty they had witnessed from an early age. The court sentenced Trevor to life in a Florida state prison, along with an additional 224 years to be served consecutively, ensuring he will never be released. Despite this, Trevor remains determined to appeal the sentence and is actively pursuing that effort.